Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a source that analyzes one of modern India's most high-profile political cases. It's a wild story that involves the first ever arrest of a sitting chief minister, and it's all about a liquor policy that, get this, might have actually made the government more money. So, let's dive right in.
You know, the source we're looking at really boils this whole thing down to one central question, a real head-scratcher. It basically argues that if you can figure out the answer to this, you start to uncover what it calls a major political conspiracy.
Okay, so where does this all kick off? The source points to a single date, March 21st, 2024, and this was a huge deal. The first time in Indian history that a sitting chief minister was arrested, just like that, taken from his home, put in custody, and eventually sent to Tihar jail. And the reason for all of this? A liquor policy. But why? Why did this unprecedented arrest happen? Well, to really get that, the source we're looking at says we gotta rewind a little. It points to 3 key political moments that it calls danger bells, which it claims signaled a growing threat to the established political order. All right, danger bell number 1. This was back in February 2020. The Aam Aadmi Party, or AAP, just swept the Delhi elections. I mean, 62 out of 70 seats, that is a massive victory. And the source argues this was all because of the party's focus on things like improving public schools and hospitals, a model that was actually getting a lot of attention around the world. Then came the second bell, just 2 years later in March 2022. AAP does it again, but this time in the state of Punjab. Another landslide, 92 out of 117 seats. So all of a sudden, they're not just a Delhi party anymore. They're now running a second state and becoming a real national player. And then the third and final bell. According to the source, this was the big one, the final straw, you could say. In April 2022, AAP announced they were going to seriously contest the elections in Gujarat. Now, you gotta understand, Gujarat is the home turf of the Prime Minister, a total fortress for the ruling party. This was seen as a very direct challenge. So what happened right after that third bell rang? The source claims that's exactly when the counterattack began. Almost immediately. A systematic effort, it says, to go after the AAP's top leadership. And just look at this sequence of events. First, the health minister is arrested, but for a case that was 5 years old. Then, a report about the liquor policy suddenly appears. That's immediately followed by the lieutenant governor ordering a CBI probe. Finally, the CBI files its case, naming the education minister as the #1 accused. The source makes a point of saying that the key officials who initiated all of this were appointees of the central government. So what's the legal tool being used here? The source identifies it as the PMLA, or the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. They call this law the Brahmastra, which in Hindu mythology is like the ultimate, unstoppable weapon. That's how critical they say this law is to the whole strategy. And this right here shows you why it's considered so powerful. See, under normal criminal law, you're innocent until proven guilty. That's a basic principle. But under the PMLA, that's flipped on its head. The burden is now on the accused to prove their own innocence. And trying to get bail? It's next to impossible, because a judge has to be satisfied that you're not guilty before a trial has even started. This brings us right back to the policy itself and that bizarre paradox we started with. How on earth can you have a corruption scam that actually makes the government more money? It just doesn't seem to add up. Let's take a look at the numbers the source presents. Okay, check this out. These numbers are really at the heart of the source's argument. The target for the new policy was just over 7,000 crore. But the actual revenue that came in was nearly 9,000 crore. That's a 27% surplus, a profit for the government, not a loss. So that leads to the most logical question you could ask, right? If this policy was such a financial success, if it was bringing in extra money for the government, why in the world would they scrap it? Well, the source argues it wasn't just scrapped, it was made impossible to continue. It claims that constant interference from the lieutenant governor and the pressure from all the CBI raids basically sabotaged the policy. And then the really ironic twist is that this forced withdrawal was then used as proof that the policy must have been corrupt from the start. Now, this is where the source makes a really interesting move. It kind of jumps into the future to a hypothetical court date, February 27th, 2026, to imagine what the final verdict in this case might be. And in its telling, the judgment is just a complete takedown of the entire prosecution.
I mean, this is a quote they present, supposedly great from that final judgment. The court allegedly finds the case to be completely baseless, saying it just doesn't hold up under any kind of real legal examination. That's a pretty strong statement.
So what was the hard evidence for this supposedly massive scandal? Well, according to the source's version of events, the main proof of a multi-core money trail was loose sheets of paper with some pencil markings on them. That's it. And the court apparently dismissed this as completely unreliable.
And this slide highlights what might be the most explosive claim in the whole analysis. It alleges that the only clear, traceable money trail that was actually found during the investigation didn't lead to the accused party at all. Instead, it allegedly led directly to the ruling party through electoral bonds from the main witness for the prosecution. Wow! The source claims the court's final assessment of the investigation was absolutely scathing. It supposedly called the whole thing a choreographed exercise built on a preconceived narrative. In other words, they decided on the conclusion first and then tried to make the facts fit. It even says the court ordered an inquiry into the lead investigating officer. So let's get to the final argument, because this is where the source ties everything together. It contends that this case isn't just a one-time thing. Instead, it reveals what it calls a repeatable template for neutralizing your political opponents.
And here is that 4-step playbook. Step 1, use central agencies to kick off an investigation. Step 2, get an intense media trial going, building a public narrative of guilt. Step 3, use that incredibly tough PMLA law to keep your opponents locked up without bail for a long, long time. And step 4, by the time the courts finally get around to a verdict, maybe even finding them not guilty, it's too late. The political damage has been done. And after all that, after the raids, the arrests, the years of investigation, the screaming headlines, what was the total amount of money or assets actually recovered from the Aam Aadmi Party in this so-called scam? According to the source, that number is 0. Nothing. And so this all leaves us with a final, really powerful question from the source. What does it mean for a democracy when the process itself, the investigation, the arrest, the time spent in jail, becomes the punishment, completely separate from whatever the final verdict might be?